And we go live in 3, 2, 1. Hey guys, this is the Will and Cody Show. We appreciate you guys listening. Last week we talked about increasing income or lowering expenses, which was a little bit of a kind of a side of what William's blog post was going to be.
Yeah, I'm still working on that. So if you listen to the last episode, I talked about that I was coming out with a blog post. And so the status is it's still being worked on. So that is still coming, I promise.
It's going to be a really good blog post.
It's in the works because I've totally been working on it this whole time and wasn't busy with other things. So I am totally going to get that done. But yeah, so that's going to be something I'll be finishing out. So hopefully it will drop soon. So stay tuned for that. So even though we talked about it in our last podcast, you could maybe get a little head start by listening to that if you haven't already. And then you could check out my blog post whenever it decides to come out and whenever it's finished. So
TBD.
Yes, it is on the way. So so I am still working on that, amongst other things. But yeah, we'll hopefully have that finished soon. But something we can talk about this time, Cody, is I saw a tweet on Twitter, and I thought it was a good conversation. It was just asking the question, would you rather have a high net worth or a high cash flow? And so for those, curious, so net worth is just everything you own. So what you are worth. So it's your assets minus your liabilities. So think it's things you own versus what you owe. So if you have any debts, that's a negative in your net worth column. Whereas if you have assets, you own things like a house, some, would count a car or cash or investments, things like that. Those would all count towards your assets. And then you just subtract out any debts you have. So if you still have, a mortgage payment that you're still trying to make, or, if you still have student loan debts, those type things, whatever debts you have would be subtracted from that to develop what your net worth is. So, and then your cash flow is just like a monthly basis. So we would kind of consider that your margin. That's the term that Cody and I kind of use for that, as far as just regular amounts coming in as income that you can then use for whatever you need. So if you want to invest those, but it's basically having a high income from. Usually it's not just one source like your job. Cash flow would be, from different sources, like from investments, or, some different avenues that you have, maybe other businesses or side hustles that we've mentioned. So those are kind of the two things. And it's, if you're familiar with business, it's basically looking at the P&L or the profit and loss, or the balance sheet. That's what we use in business for those both same two terms. It's money coming in or what you own. So Cody, I'll turn it over to you. Give your first thoughts on which one you would rather focus on or rather have, is a high net worth or a high cash flow?
I mean, that's a really good question. It probably just depends on where you're at in life.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, like net worth, let's say someone our age and they just bought a house, right? Their net worth is probably negative.
Yeah.
Because of all that debt with the mortgage and everything, even though they're
as I was
doing
saying
fine.
that, I don't know if people include mortgage. I was just thinking about that.
They
I don't know
don't?
if we include mortgage debt. So take that back. I don't know. I think some people do and some people don't. But
Okay.
mostly I think the things that'll affect it is like consumer debt, and credit cards, and then student loans. And
I
then
gotcha.
I think most people might include
I feel like I would.
Yeah.
Because I don't have a mortgage yet, but let's just scratch that. Let's not think of mortgages. Let's just think of it as like an expense.
Yeah.
With that, then again, it would probably just depend on where you're at. I mean, if you think about it, let's say you're almost at retirement and then you get a high net worth and it's all in your retirement accounts, then that's probably a good thing. Because then you can just kind of pull from there, especially if you're getting 10% out of those retirement accounts, you got a pretty good nest egg and just live off that 10%. That'd be great. But then let's say that you are high net worth in retirement accounts, but you're not retired yet, and you can't retire yet without hitting those fees and penalties to pull them out. Then, like, I don't know, say 45 or 40 or something like that. Well, then high net worth isn't really doing much because you still need to, work to live, to pay everything up. So, it just depends on where it's at. So cash flow in that sense would be kind of nice, because cash flow, like, what's the point of cash flow? It's like to have some income, not have to work, right?
Right.
Especially with passive income, that'd be great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess there's a balance there. So I really don't have an answer to that. It's probably, it really just depends like where you're at. I would say both. I mean, that would be nice, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I was just looking it up. So I was wrong. I don't know what I was right the first time. I was wrong to second guess myself. I don't know why you wouldn't, but yeah, you should include mortgage. I don't know why you wouldn't. I don't know what I'm thinking. I was thinking of something else, but I think, you include mortgage.
It's a liability.
Because it's a liability. I don't know why I didn't include it. But yes, so especially, I agree. Somebody in, maybe it depends life stage, as you mentioned, and, how accessible is your net worth. So I think some people would say, if you're younger, maybe cash flow is more important, because you could have a high net worth, but if you're not able to access it, then what good does it do for you?
Right.
Versus cash flow, usually there's a lot of things you can start building at a younger age. Versus when you're older, you might not have a lot of immediate needs, and so you could just take care of those with your net worth, and just like, oh, I'll sell this there, or like, I'll have some investment income, that you can kind of use for that. Versus somebody that's got a lot of things that they're trying to pay for at a young age. And so they can really use that. I think it does, both can be important. I think you need to look at both, because I think there's risks on either side. I think you could have a really high net worth, but if you don't have any cash flow, how can you replace that net worth if something goes wrong? Or are you going to have to keep living off your net worth if something goes wrong? So I think you need to have that, but then also at the same, time frame or same, viewpoint, if somebody, I know a lot of people, and this could be a separate discussion, so we could dive into it if you want, but there's, financial advice people, that are really big on cash flow, but they take on a lot of really big debt to generate cash flow. So somebody that's kind of has this approach, if you've read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is Robert Kiyosaki. He doesn't cover it as much in that book, but he has another book about cash flow, the Cash Flow Quadrant, which I haven't read yet, but that might be a good one just to read, just to get his viewpoint. But he would be a little more risky than you or I would be, as far as taking on large amounts of debt. But he would say, but you're getting this cash flow with it. And so I would just say, I think you need to look at both when making choices. You can't say, oh, well, this is great for my cash flow, but you also have to look, oh, how is this affecting your net worth? Like if you're taking on a bunch of debt, that's really going to hurt your net worth. And so I think you need to look at both. I think they go hand in hand. When you make decisions, instead of just looking at, oh, this is great. This is going to be so much cash flow, but you're taking on all this debt. What happens if something goes wrong with the cash flow? How are you going to cover it? So I think, multiple sources of income, we can get into that as well. And then, so I think there's risks on both sides. So I think you can't just focus on one instead of the other. As far if I was going to answer the question, which one I would rather have, trying to think. I think it would depend on what my net worth is in. I think if you have, to your point earlier, if your net worth is in retirement accounts and you can't touch it until you're, old or, older, like 59, then if you're young, what good is that to you? Like, it's still good. It'll be useful later. But currently, if you have something where it's like, oh man, I can't afford this in my regular income, how am I going to pay for it? You could have an emergency fund, but you're not really able to generate more wealth other than what's in the retirement accounts. If that makes sense. Versus a cash flow, you can continually keep generating wealth with margin, in that, I just think there can be risks of what happens to if something goes wrong with that cash flow and you were depending on it. That's where people can get a lot of, difficulties with debt is, I can make the payment, but what happens if something happens to your income? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think similar situation where it's like we get so dependent on the cash flow that if something goes wrong, and that's another reason you should have, try to have multiple streams. If you're going to shoot for cash flow, you should have it coming from different avenues. That way, if something happens to one, you still got the rest. But I think there's still a risk there that you need to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, going to net worth, I know some people that they call themselves property poor, or that's what they call themselves, but really they're property rich. They have a lot of property and their net worth is well over $1 million. Yeah. With their actual cash and what they're able to live off of is, just the income that family brings in. So to that point, what is the point of the property if it's not doing anything for you? It is there, it is worth something, and it goes to your net worth, but what is it doing? Now, if you turn it into, say, rental properties or things like that, and in this case, the people that I'm thinking of, it's just land. So it's very hard to create cash flow off of that.
It is. Yeah.
So the typical thing that I see on like Instagram, Twitter, and all those about creating cash flow is rental properties. Just go find a property, get a mortgage on it, put down the smallest down payment possible, and then go find a renter and let that renter pay for the mortgage. And then if there's a little bit extra, there's your income.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like that idea. I like that idea a lot. I wish I could do it. But, when you think about it, that house could potentially be $200,000-$300,000, especially in this market right now. That's a lot of debt to generate what? You're able to build that equity in it and build your net worth. And then there might be that little, couple $100 that's coming in that you don't have to worry about, but then you have to worry about maintaining it. You have to worry about keeping renters in it. And then you're in debt and there's risk involved with that. So, is that something to just be jumping into? I don't think so. Now let's say a different way. Let's say that I paid off my house, or I'm really close to paying off my house. And then I decide I want to move, but then I keep the old house. I buy a new house and I'm paying that. I keep my old house, which is paid off or almost paid off. And then I have a renter in there. Well, see, now it's not as risky because the debt is not the $200,000-$300,000, right? It may be more like $50,000 or something like that. So that might be a better exchange. And that might be something to build that cash flow. So, there could be side hustles that you start where you're, doing, mowing some lawns, stuff like that. That could be good cash flow. That's not risky at all. Or go buying like a dividend stock that gives you something, and maybe a little bit, and there's risk in buying stocks, right? So you got to outweigh that. But then there's also risk in just investing in general. And that's how you're going to build your net worth is investing in something. Yeah. So, there really is, it's not a one size fits all. It's just where are you in your situation in life. Yeah.
I agree with the point, just as far as people that are cash poor, but they may be rich. Because if you think of it as like if an investment, you could sell partial amounts of it. But if you have a property like a residence, there's a lot of people that are, house poor, where they've got a house. But think about it. You can't sell part of your house, if you need the money. You've got to sell the whole thing and move. And that's such a big headache to have to do. So it's not accessible. So I think, you have to have a little bit that's accessible enough. You can't have it all tied into one thing that's hard to access. And then, to your point about, wanting to take out debt to get a rental property and then have the renters, pay for it. I think, it's a great idea. Like it'd be awesome if that, worked out, but there just is risk involved. There's a lot of risk involved. And so somebody, once, and I know this is worst case scenario, but they were asking, they're like, what would be the worst thing if you did that? What would be the worst possible scenario? And what I said was like, well, you can't find a renter because then you're having to make 2 mortgage payments. You're having to make your own or your rent plus that. And they were like, yes, that would be rough. But the worst one, and this is, anybody who rents properties is going to have this risk, is to have bad renters. because not only they're not paying you, but they're possibly trashing your place. There's a lot of options, and then it's a long battle to get them out of there, get a place fixed up, try to get any money from them as far as fixing it, so there's a lot of other things. And I think there's plenty of upside to it as well, but there is risk involved. So I think you have to consider that. Can you cover $300,000 in debt if you had to pay it as well as what you're already paying? And I think for most people, they would say no. And so it's like, is that worth the increased cash flow? I think for some, if it works out, okay, great. I mean, everything went right for you. And so you've got, a rental property that's bringing in money. But what if it didn't work out? Then you're really buried. So I just say, just think about those scenarios. And maybe there's other options, to your point, that can still generate that cash flow without that big risk of, a ton of debt. So maybe you only take a little bit of debt. So there's a few options out there, for people that are considering it. But yeah, I think you just got to think about it. What could go wrong just in case. When you stick your neck out like that, I would want to make sure I know what could possibly, go wrong.
I mean, definitely, even when you're like trying to build a business, I mean, that's one of the things they think of is like, just when you get a business loan, like, somebody's got to pay that off. Right. And there's so much, you kind of, when you start getting into stuff like that, you got to think of it like a business. And what sucks is when it's your personal money, like it really hits you. And, you may have, cash flow coming in from a rental property, but who owns that house? You do, or the bank does, and you're trying to pay it off. Right. Yeah. So at the end of the day, whose responsibility is to have it paid off? It's yours. And so that sucks. Yeah. So, that's something I obviously will want to do eventually, but I will probably go in the route of paying off my own house first and then slowly make that a rental, maybe go buy another one if I have enough cash flow myself from my income and other sources to be able to pay that house that I'm living in. And so that would probably be the route I would take. Because think of, cash flow is also your income. It's your spouse's income. It's, dividends from investments. It can be side hustles, anything like that. So, think of it that way. But if you can afford it, like I know some investor type people that they have a fairly large income. And so taking on $250,000 of debt in a mortgage is really not that much to them.
Yeah.
It's something that they can just pay off like that.
Right.
And they just do it just from the convenience of, having money for other investments. And they don't want to just buy the house outright because they could have another potential opportunity, and so that, it just depends on where you're at. But for people like you and I don't recommend doing that. Don't go buy a bunch of houses.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I've seen that, you see it on social media and stuff, people advertising for, their investment strategy. And it's basically put the minimum amount down on a house, flip it and try to sell it for more. And I think it, congrats if it worked for them. But I just don't think that could work for everybody.
Yeah.
And so, that
you only see the success stories online.
You don't see when people lost everything trying to do that same thing. Because they couldn't sell the house and then they're stuck with this loan and they, how are you going to pay it?
Yeah.
So I think, that's a little bit of worst case scenario. But I think you have to think about that. So, big things to consider as far as net worth is, can you touch it? Like is you able to access it, or not? And then cash flow is, how risky is it? Did you have to put your net worth in jeopardy just to take out this cash flow? So that's why I think things like side hustles, businesses, getting some extra income, side income, things like that are great ways that you don't have to do the risk, but you can still increase your cash flow.
Absolutely.
Or as we kind of talk about it in margin, just the difference between your expenses and your income. So a good way to do that is just increase your income. So I think there's less risky ways that you can do, those same things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, if you're young, I'd say I would probably lean more towards the cash flow stage. Just try to get as much in as you can, because I think it helps. There's just a multitude of needs. And then later on, I think, net worth can generate a cash flow for you. Once you have it. And so that could be a way to go. There are ways to, if you have a high net worth that's, you're able to access it. It's not all tied up in like a house or something. You can buy things that generate, as we just mentioned, you could buy an investment property that generate, cash flow for you. So I think there's options out there.
Yeah.
So that's why I think both, a really balanced approach to both, can really work out in your favor.
Yeah.
That way you're not lopsided
in your mind when you're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. That way you're not just like focused on one thing or the other. And you can kind of, I think it's a really balanced way to look at it.
Right. So speaking of building margin and cash flow, I have built my margin by $5 a day by doing basically nothing.
Yeah. You were telling me about this.
Yeah. So my computer, well, it's not right now because I'm recording, but I do a little bit of PC gaming. So I had a graphics card long time ago that I just kind of like bought some things, sold some things, did a little bit of trading. I got a decent graphics card, and they're insane right now. I could actually sell the sucker for probably twice what I paid for it at the time.
Yeah,
but it's right now mining Bitcoin, and I made $5 a day so far. So that's kind of cool. So definitely trying to build a little bit of cash flow.
Yeah, I got a buddy, as well. You've got it, so
right.
Yeah, you got it set up,
might buy my Starbucks coffees or something every once in a while.
Yeah,
or may invest it. I probably should do that.
Yeah.
But I got a buddy that he actually does this kind of more than I do. He buys graphics cards whenever he can, and then builds rigs. And then he's making, I think he said something about like $20 to $30 in the last 14 hours. He just texted me a couple minutes ago. So that's pretty cool. It's just something he's just slowly doing as the money comes in. He grabs it. And then there's risk involved, obviously, with cryptocurrencies. We're going to talk a little bit about cryptocurrencies in a minute. But, it's kind of something that's interesting. So there's another way to build some cash flow. So
yeah, I think it's another good option. There's plenty of online businesses, people doing things like that, where there's opportunities online and you can generate, pretty decent cash flow from those type of things. It's stuff that you may already have, to your point. Like you already had the setup with your computer and graphics card and all that.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of options. There's a subreddit, and I was going to send this to you a little while ago, but I forgot to. So I'll tell you now. There's a subreddit called Beer Money.
Okay.
And it's just a group of guys that find every kind of when you like find a survey, like an app that like gives you a survey and you get like a gift card or something like that.
Yeah.
Like these guys go to the extreme, and they'll post like how much they made that month using like swag bucks and Google reviews and Facebook viewpoints, all this stuff. And I saw like a couple $1,000s at one point.
That's
last
crazy.
month. Yeah. So, there's other options there.
There's
if you guys
things
want
you
to
can do.
build a little bit of cash flow, a little bit helps. There's so much stuff. Just go find a subreddit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. There's plenty of options out there. I did the Google reviews for a while. I think I got like $10 over a few weeks.
Yeah.
But I didn't do a ton. But yeah, I know my sister did, back in the day, swag bucks. And that helped pay for like Christmas one year because she just did it, a ton, and then got enough for gift cards to buy a few presents. And so, there's options out there. I think there's, those will be a little smaller, but there's, some decent options as well in side hustles and things that you could do. Yeah.
Yeah. So we wanted to talk a little bit. Let me check the time. We got a little bit of time. So we want to talk a little bit, going back to a couple of podcasts ago, we gave not our opinion, but kind of just an idea of back when, hashtag GME and GameStop stock, Dogecoin, all that stuff was kind of a big craze. And we were talking about that, about what our opinions were about, cryptocurrencies and what that investment portfolio should look like if you were to look into that. And so you and I have been talking, would like to kind of get into a little bit of building our portfolio, expanding it, and then looking at cryptocurrencies as a potential small asset to have in our portfolio.
Right. Yeah, kind of looking at it, I think a few podcasts ago, we also talked about asset allocation. So if you haven't listened to that one, I think it'd be really good just to get an idea what we're talking about here. But just as it becomes more stable, and again, I know it based on everybody's opinion on it, it'll change. But as I think it becomes more accepted and a more stable, you kind of look at it more like a commodity. And I think that's what it is. It's like, it's kind of like a gold or a silver. When you honestly look at it, it's, it really kind of tracks like a commodity. With as far as the stable ones, I'm not talking about Dogecoin. That's its own thing. But as far as the more stable ones, so that's what I'm starting to look at it as. Because I'm always wary, of it's really just what somebody will pay for it. That's what it's worth. But also that's the same way with, other things. The rarity of it and the uniqueness of it is the value, and what you can do with it. So that's always been some of my concern, but as it's become more accepted, and it really has, taken off a lot, it then becomes a little bit more of a legitimate asset that people, would accept. And so, my kind of thinking is, what do I think it's going to look like in 10 years? Rather than, I know a lot of people are just buying for the daily up and down, trying to trade it, but trying to look at long term. Do I think this is something that's still going to be around and worth more than it is now? Or is there, the possibility that it's going to, be accepted or be, more mainstream than it is? And I think there's a good possibility that it will. So that's where it's becoming more and more looking like an asset that you might want to just add a portion. Again, I think which we've talked about last time, as far as not wanting to, put all your eggs in one basket and say the success of this is going to be my financial success. It's all riding on that. But I think it could be a piece. I think we've said that before, that it could be, a piece of a good investment strategy. So I'm getting more and more close to that. I just need to understand it more. At least that's my own viewpoint. But it would be something where I would buy some and then just hold it, not try to not trying to make a quick buck, just investing in it long term.
Right. And that's kind of the same thing. I've done a little bit back when Dogecoin first came out. I bought some as a joke, and then it turned out not to be a joke.
Yeah.
But I had sold way before, and so I've got huge FOMO right now.
Yeah.
Of all these people that are making a killing right now.
Yeah.
But that's just how it is.
Yeah.
That's why I don't trade, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think if we follow a similar mindset strategy that we normally do for everything else we've done with investments, is diversify, asset allocation. So this being another potential asset, diversifying over those assets. So there's various types of cryptos, doing our research on each one of them, seeing what's stable, what's not. And then, just kind of putting a small portion, whatever we decide is the right amount, into that. It's kind of the same idea as like having a little bit in like penny stocks or something like that. Right. So it's just a little bit of, if something crazy does happen and you had a little bit of that certain cryptocurrency and it became big, well, at least you have a part in it. You had a part of that growth.
Okay.
But we need to still think long term. And you said 10 years. And I love that. That's long term. 10 to 15 years is long term.
Yeah.
And so that's the way we need to think about investing. So if this is an asset, 100% agree. This will probably be around in 10, 15 years. And it's probably going to be a lot bigger than what we see it is right now. So should we have a part of it? Yeah, I think so. A small portion, because we still don't understand it. We don't know what it's going to do. And there's so much volatility. So I highly recommend don't put all your eggs in one basket. Right. Yeah. So this does not include the 15% of your income going into a retirement account.
Yeah.
This is not that. This is like extra stuff to diversify your portfolio a little bit, maybe a little bit extra when the debt's paid and the emergency fund is full and you're good to go and you're having a good time. Maybe consider some. And that's what we're going to do.
Yeah. No, I still think long term. So I'm going to still call us somewhat young, Cody, where our investment horizon for retirement specifically it's going to be a while. All right. It's going to be a while. So things like that, I still have long-term faith in the stock market, and in companies that are going to keep producing well and, keep growing. And so I still believe in that long term, in the long term for us.
Long
but
term.
I think this is another thing that's worth considering investing in, not just trading and hoping it grows and then you can sell it real quick, but investing for, as you mentioned, at least 10 to 15 years and say, okay, I think over that, there's a possibility for some really good growth. And to your point, you don't want to put everything in it, but you may want to have a portion so you don't miss out on some of those gains. So Cody and I have talked, I think I talked about it a while ago, about wanting to set up a, more of a midterm early retirement kind of fund, where, it invests and it'd be in a taxable account, but I'd still be able to invest just for the flexibility of it. And then as it grows, if I wanted to use it before 59 and a half, I could, use it, for that. And so I'm thinking about maybe making it a part of that portfolio,
right.
Where I would also just have some, index funds and things like that, in that. So I'm thinking about putting it would kind of be in that portfolio, where it would kind of sit.
I gotcha. Yeah. And that's what I'm thinking as well. I mean, I'm also thinking cost dollar averaging or dollar cost averaging. So, maybe having a small percentage of my income going into that same kind of portfolio that we're talking about, that midterm, maybe early retirement, whatever that looks like. And then having maybe like, I don't know, 3 to 5% or whatever that looks like when we do our budget going into that. And then maybe having cryptocurrencies as a small portion of it. And then what cryptocurrencies I do, I'm not so sure. There really is no ETF that has all these cryptocurrencies.
There are a few I know that are looking, but there's very new. They're very new funds. Yeah.
So, not quite sure what that looks like. So for now, I'll probably just, grab some of the popular ones.
Yeah.
Ones that have been around for a little bit longer, than Doge or Hoj or all the other ones.
Yeah.
So obviously Bitcoin and Ethereum and Litecoin, stuff like that you've heard of before. So probably put a little bit of that, and do that just a little bit at a time, just that way. Because I got friends that, they'll do that trading stuff. And that's so stressful. I couldn't do that. Because like today, it's the 14th or the 13th. And, it dropped dramatically. I've got so many friends that are like hating their lives right now. I don't want to deal with that. I just want to put a little bit, think about the long haul, the 10, 15 years. So,
no, I agree. And it's not, not looking to speculate on, I think this one's going to go up by the end of the year. I'm like, what's my best long-term bet? Okay. That's the things I want to look at. And sure, you can adjust as you go of like, okay, this one is not going to turn out, or this one looks promising. Okay, we can move over to that, but not just trying to be like, oh, I'm buying this one today. Oops, try to sell it quick, as you mentioned, kind of trading it that way. So still having a long-term perspective. The only thing will be a temptation is if it really goes up, when do you sell? Do you sell, as soon as it goes up, or do you just say, hey, I still think it could be longer or higher in the long term? So that'll be the only thing you'll have to consider, as you look at that. But I think having a long-term horizon enables something like this to still be, become a good investment. Yeah. If you look at it that way.
Yeah. I think it's going to help some people with FOMO following this kind of strategy. It's going to help me.
It's true.
Right. At least have a piece of the pie, right? Just something that's
the only thing is cool. I would always wish I put more in,
That's fair. That's a good point.
I think so. But I think it can. Yeah. It can definitely help to say, okay, well, at least I benefited some.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I found out a strategy for finding out if it's a good cryptocurrency to invest in, something that's more stable than others. If somebody can tweet and it still exists, it's probably okay. I think that's my strategy.
Good plan.
Yeah. So far.
So there needs to be there's going to be a new metric in investing where it's going to be the tweet impact ratio or something. The number of tweets is, causes so much change in the price,
Yeah. How many hashtags did Elon Musk tweet about it? Yeah.
Yeah. Number of tweets from Elon affected the price this way. And so it's going to be the Elon coefficient or something. Elon ratio,
We can patent that.
I can see it. I can see it being a thing.
It's going to be a thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, we're right at time. So we appreciate you guys listening. We really enjoy doing this. We're going to keep doing this. We're trying to do it once a week. William's going to have his not podcast. Going to have his blog post up sometime. So
sometime.
We'll let you know.
That is a
just check out
very
social
definite
media.
sometime.
And if you haven't listened to the last podcast, do listen to that before you read that blog post. They'll go hand in hand pretty well.
Yep.
But yeah, guys, we will see you next time.
See ya.